Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, and today I am talking about Halloween, because it is going to be Halloween when this airs. So, I've talked about this before in other contexts, sometimes on inappropriate characters, for example, and stuff like that, but there's a lot of interesting kind of concepts to horror as a genre. And, if you watch the latest Inappropriate Characters that we did, which was also the Halloween special, we spent, there goes Meatball. We spent quite a bit of time talking there about, different RPGs that are horror themed, and especially had this kind of debate about whether Call of Cthulhu is basically done, it's overcooked, and there's not much else to do with it. And then what other alternatives there are, alternatives like, for example, the Invisible College, right? But there's also like elements of horror that aren't strictly in a horror genre. I mean, well, Invisible College has definitely got horror elements, but also has, conspiracy theory stuff and some other types like investigative gaming, secret agent type gaming. So it's a mix of stuff, right? But besides that, I've got here the Old School Companion. And I could definitely say medieval stories, a lot of them have horrific elements. And so a lot of the adventures that are in the Old School Companion 2, which are all medieval authentic adventures, have very strong horror elements. Like there's basically mass murderers, people who are feeding people to demons or things like that, dangerous cults, all of that sort of cool stuff. And so that's all very playable. But really, we talked about that, about the alternatives, let's say, to just going all tentacle town on Cthulhu, which I think has really kind of in some ways cheapened the entire horror genre for the RPG field. What I want to talk today is more about like the meta level, the kind of politics of horror, you could say, because there is what you have to understand if you're going to run a horror game is what kind of horror game you want it to be. I mean, obviously, when I say you must understand, what I'm saying is as a DM, it can really help you to understand, because of course some people will get all this kind of instinctually, right? Almost everyone will get it instinctually without necessarily thinking it through. But let's think it through for a second, because that might be of use to you in trying to work out some things about the type of game you want to run. Meatball is making a lot of noise. What are you doing? Oh, Meatball's sitting on an interesting looking bag. Okay. So the main thing I think you need to know about the kind of the politics of horror is that there are two central conflicting elements in the horror genre. And now neither of these are explicitly, let's say, when I talk about the politics of horror, neither of them are explicitly right-wing or left-wing. But as you will see, there are manifestations of right and left-wing, in the modern era thinking that actually do affect the horror genre. So the two main kind of aspects that cross in horror are a morality tale, the concept of a morality tale, where there's, it's good versus evil, some great evil, right? Not just ordinary evil. It's an evil that is beyond the norm. And the other part is the fear of the other, of that which is unknown, or which is not right, which in some way is, it triggers the instinct for disgust in us, because it is something that seems to be an unnaturalization of something natural, or something completely unnatural that is therefore terrifying. And those are the kind of the key themes in almost all horror. And usually you have a lot of horror stories and, whatever else, including games, will have a mix of those two, but not always, and especially not lately. So the first thing to point out is that there is actually a real life sort of element to this, it was very interesting that like in the early 2000s, there was this big study that was made about the popularity of different genres in horror. And the result that they got, this is for the United States, right? So when there were, let me see if I've got to make sure I get this right. So when you had a presidency that was Republican in the United States, so the president is a Republican, this increased the popularity of zombie stories. And when you had a president who was a Democrat, this increased the popularity of vampire stories. And by stories here, I'm meaning like TV, movies, comics, etc., right? Novels, everything. So the conception, the interpretation of this study suggested that this has to do with two different forms of the kind of the fear of the other, you know? So when you have a president who's a Republican, the people who unconsciously reflect their problem with that is, you know, I guess what you could say is the left coast liberals, right? And what they will therefore do is create stories about these mindless hordes of dirty people that are threatening to destroy everything they hold dear, right? That is to say, zombies. On the other hand, when a Democrat is president, you have this instinctual fear reaction that causes people to tell stories about these elitist bloodsuckers that want to drain the life essence of good-hearted people, you know, of what is true and what is good. So therefore, vampire stories become more popular. So that's not to say that, you know, that zombies are all right wing or vampires are all left wing or something like that, right? And there's a lot of overlap. This is very kind of generalized perception, but it is an interesting correlation. You know, it's not necessarily definitive proof of anything, but it's a very interesting correlation because obviously our horror stories are meant to reflect the subconscious fears we have as a people and as a society at different times. That's what almost all of the medieval sort of scary stories are about. Almost all of them are in some form or another morality tales. Now, some of them, because morality has become so different over time, are very hard to like interpret in modern contexts, you know. And there are some of them that are surprisingly sophisticated because there's, you know, like for the story of the story of Tamlin, which is one of my, which is I call Tamlin in the Old School Companion, is a very complex horror story, though. But it has like two different types of protagonists. It has the elf who seduces and takes the maidenhood of a fair maiden, and you know then gets her into trouble, right? Like she's, the implication is she's pregnant from this, and it's going to be something pretty horrific because he's not human or something. And then you have on the other side that Tamlin himself is an exile from the court of the Queen of the Fairies, who wants to capture him and have him given as a tribute to hell, where he would be devoured, right? And so this is the implication of it all in the oldest versions of this story. You have Tamlin as an elf, right? And he's not just an elf. The point of that story is that he is the worst of the worst type of elf, right? Like he's the horrible trickster elf that is going to, you know, if you're a young maiden and you go out into the forest and you see some guy that's nicely dressed up, he's going to try to seduce you. And the next thing you know, you're going to be pregnant, your life will be ruined, and this guy should be in hell, right? Like that was basically the message of that era of the morality story. But as it evolved, especially like because I think that the earliest part of this story was just like it was before the era of courtly and romantic love and all of that, right? So then in the later versions, it keeps becoming more sanitized, where what you have is in some versions, Tamlin's actually a human who was captured by the elves, right? And he's really skillful, so he knows some of the things that elves can do now, but he's actually human deep down inside. So that saves her from the impregnation by an alien entity part of the story. And then it turns out he's actually a fair knight. It wasn't his fault that he was taken, and he ends up the maiden ends up having to save him from the Queen of the Fairies so he isn't sent to hell. And it becomes a love story. But in some versions, you still actually have that Tamlin, at the end of it all, is kind of tricking her. And she actually ends up damning herself, the princess, or the maiden, rather, ends up damning herself because she fell for these trickeries, right? So you can see in the course of the history of this one story that is one of the adventures that I've compiled for the Old School Companion too. You can see that there's an evolution that also reacts and shifts with the times. Like in different periods, the message can become different. But the things that are pretty consistent in most of human history in different cultures are these elements that there has to be. There usually needs to be an underlying take on the moral universe. This is one of the things that traditional horror has always had. That's why you see Van Helsing versus Dracula is a story that is laced with kind of Christian concepts and the battle of good versus evil, absolute good versus or absolute evil versus the good that men can bring out of their souls. Anyway, and then there's this fear of otherness. Now there are some stories that don't have one or don't have the other, but most of them have a combination of the two. The problem with our modern society is that in a lot of cases, it's very hard to drum up a morality tale in a society that's become almost completely amoral, where we're literally telling everyone that there is no such thing as actual morality. And so the tendency in postmodern horror is that the monster is actually the good guy. You know what? Cruella de Vil is actually the hero, even though she wants to murder 100 puppies, right? Doesn't matter. She's a queer icon, right? And I mean, this is also a part of the modern conflict of horror that you see. Like the zombie versus vampire thing is almost passé at this point, because I mean that was done. That study was like 20 years ago that they did, and they were looking at basically all of the latter half of the 20th century to kind of judge this thing. But like today, the question wouldn't be like zombie versus vampire. The question, like the bad guys in a lot of the postmodern horror stories are just like, they're guys who vote Republican, right? And they're just monsters, or something like that. And I'm not saying that only one side has this fear of other, because you could imagine, except that our society, one side has all the temporal power and the other one does not. But you can imagine, let's say if there was a right-wing version of Hollywood, right? Just as biased, but on the other side, that instead of the villain being a hillbilly analogy, right? You could have the villain being a drag queen analogy or something like that. Because it's whatever the thing is that you find distasteful that gets like kind of blown up into something even more distasteful to make it a monster. So both sides can have the fear of the other. The part that is more difficult is the morality tale. So and you have to differentiate that between the objective morality, that there is good and there is real evil in the world. And you still see, of course, a lot of stories that do have this. Hey, it's Meatball. Hey, Meatball. A lot of stories do still have this, where there is like, a cosmic evil or something that must be defeated, often by like plucky kids or something like that. but increasingly there are many stories that seem to be presenting an amoral universe. That is, hey, what the heck are you doing? Don't knock down the old school companion. And this isn't necessarily recent, right? One of the things that defines Cthulhu as a setting is that it's an amoral universe, a universe that has no place for humanity. Humanity makes no sense. There is no purpose to being human. There is nothing that is actually worth fighting for in the kind of cosmic sense. And people say, oh, yes, well, but, you're fighting for yourself and the people you love. But, the message is still ultimately none of it is important, right? All of it is just cosmically meaningless. So it's a nihilist perspective that you can make it to slightly more cheerier nihilism of, I'm going to do what I can to have a kind of happy life until my meaningless happy life is over, right? So you have in the moral context, the more you deviate from this notion of good versus evil, even let's say, because probably there are a lot of you who do believe in absolute good versus evil, especially among my YouTube channel people, right? But there might be some of you who don't really. But the point is that when you're doing horror, for it to really catch on, to really hit home, it is my position that having an objective moral universe is something that needs to kind of be included for everything that happens in it to matter, right? Like the fact that in a medieval story you always have kind of the Christian framework underlying it, and people say, oh well, but then why does it matter? Because whatever, because the evil of it is always going to be defeated by the good eventually, right? Well, but it's just the opposite, right? Is that then what happens? What it means is that evil is a corrupting force that needs to be defeated to restore an order that is fundamentally good, a world that is good, and people that are good, and that the problem has become that people have corrupted themselves in some way, or that the world has become corrupted and it needs to be healed, to set right something that has gone wrong. So I think that that's almost always a more powerful story. And it's something that allows you to create a bigger stake to it, in that there isn't going to be the hand of God coming down to do it. We are supposed to be the agents of the moral good. Whereas if there is no moral good, then it's just about, getting out alive as long as you can. And in fact, nobody is ultimately going to just get out alive of it in the bigger sense, right? There is also one very big difference that we see tied to this kind of morality concept, which is that there's also the countercultural morality concept, right? So in one of the big divisions in the horror genre is between horror elements that present the heroes of the horror elements are either, let's say, regular people or people of a special virtue, right? In the medieval stories, it was often, obviously, handsome princes or things like that, right? Or devout saints, right? Or things along those lines. Heroes, in other words, or regular people who rise up to become heroes, right? The hero's journey, versus what has become much more popular in the kind of the postmodern context, but was not non-existent before that. I mean, there are definitely stories in the Western and in other cultures that deal with this, which is the heroes as the outcasts, where, usually that is a sign that part of the problem has corrupted some of society. One example in a subgenre of the heroes as the outcast is the kid horror story, right? Where you have some situation that none of the adults are trustworthy or are going to listen or could possibly understand or see what's going on. And so only the kids, who are in a way always kind of a type of underclass in the society, can, the plucky kids can come together and stop the evil clown or whatever, and nobody else could help them. So it's up to them, right? And in this, there's a traditional context where the idea of the everyman hero who maybe later discovers he's a prince or something like that's the most classic, one of the most classic elements of myth, right? That is like literally what the hero's journey. And then the outcast heroes, a lot of times in the traditional version, it is meant to reflect when something is wrong in the society, right? And so once the society is rectified, the outcast hero becomes is discovered to have been, in fact, all along the upstanding figure in the society, and so they're restored to what would be the natural place. There can also be some outcast heroes that, in particularly sophisticated stories, that have to die before the end of that because they're actually, there's something off about them, right? That there's a flaw in them that cannot be taken into the promised land of the new world after the evil is defeated, and so you get that kind of the anti-hero guy who's probably supposed to die at the end, right? While the young plucky farm boy gets to become the knight and actually gets to be there after the end because he's not tainted by that whatever vice that the anti-hero has. In a postmodern context of horror, of course, this has also been severely altered, let's say, in that it has become increasingly more common to have the story be that the outcasts are the real heroes. And we've been seeing this in all kinds of contexts, including in Call of Cthulhu products, where they've fetishized this into a critical race theory context, right? Of a world where the people of a certain skin color are both oppressed, but also the magical people who are the only ones who can do good. And the other people are basically maybe not even human. I don't know what they're trying to say in it. But they're like in these versions of it, it's never about like restoring the correct moral order. It's about bringing down the entire order, destroying the entire system, and then having this illusion that after that, the world will somehow be a better place with the collapse of the hierarchy, right? Horror stories are almost always, in the traditional context, about either the hierarchy falling apart or the hierarchy becoming corrupted from within or being assaulted from without by some terrible evil. It's they are by definition, they're like the version, the whole thing. Don't go into the woods. That's where the witch is. She'll try to give you candy, but then she'll eat you. Right? That's a horror story. It's a nursery. It's a children's story, but it's a horror story. And the whole message of it is to point out that if there isn't an element of a stable social hierarchy, and you go out to the wildland or you bring the wildland into the village, then what's going to happen are terrible, terrible things. And so it's very hard for the postmodernists to make a good horror RPG or a good horror TV show or novel or whatever, because they have been brainwashed into believing that the ideal result, this is what I said in Inappropriate Characters, how do you actually end up criticizing the Lovecraftian concept is about how you're going to have the death of God, a world with no reason, a world where human beings are completely irrelevant and the cosmos is hostile, will create madness in people that will thrust them back into a new dark age, right? And like that, that's more or less, I'm paraphrasing, but it's more or less what Lovecraft described it as, And the problem is, how do you make that even work in a society that is actually proved that Lovecraft was right, that our society has collapsed into a new dark age, a dark age where we are told nothing is true, right? 2 and 2 equals 5. And whatever you imagine is just real. And you don't have the idea of objective truth is actually a criminal offense, right? In that world, that is the world of post-Cthulhu, right? That's the world where the thing that Lovecraft was really afraid of, because it wasn't tentacles. Tentacles apparently grossed him out or fascinated him or something, but the thing he was afraid of was what kind of a society would exist in a world without meaning. It's the same thing that other people had figured out earlier was also really a big problem, right? Like, how do you live in a post-God world, you know? That is to say, a world where the kind of paradigm of the medieval and pre-modern worldview, which allowed for an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God that interacted in many different ways, and a world where there was a divine order to everything. When that is that foundation is slipped out from under you, what happens? And what ends up happening is not necessarily a literal anarchy, though inevitably that'll follow. What happens is a moral anarchy that is a complete collapse of not just moral in the sense of making good choices, but in the sense of even like the most barest foundations of things like math, right? Like science. Science has gone completely now, right? More than half of every study being published is unrepeatable, right? They can't be replicated. So it means that it's not actually science. Now it's become just a cult to a mad god, you know, and so has most of our politics and you know, what passes for religion has become a cult of narcissism, right? So all of this in that kind of world, you know, what is the monster? I guess you can do one of two things. You can embrace that kind of a setting, and there the monster can be perhaps normal people, right? People that don't want to embrace the chaos of chaos and warmth of a new dark age. Or you could, you know, say, well, you know what, those sorts of games are actually stupid. And what if there is an order and structure to the universe, and you are agents fighting for it against something that is trying to corrupt it or taint it or to directly destroy all of it, you know, or to destroy it in a small scale, right? Destroy it in a community. And so these are the things you need to think about. And it isn't just as clear cut as say like Republican or Democrat or something like that. There are significant subtleties to it. But if you're thinking about these sorts of things in the creation of your campaign, if you're running a horror adventure or a horror campaign, it will give you a better idea of what is it that you're meant to make scary. That's number one, right? And then number two is, why is it scary, and what will it be that they're really fighting underneath just the monster of the week or something like that, you know? And the things that today we often think of as the monster of the week. I mean, Frankenstein was, if you read the actual novel, is this incredibly sophisticated story. It's not about fighting this guy who's just like, you know, he's got some bolts on the side of his neck. It's about the question of what is humanity, right? And so like, where does that, how do you reconcile with it, right? And I mean, Dracula, the Bram Stoker version, is in some ways more simplistic, but it's actually what the horror is there is of losing your own humanity and what that entails, you know, the dangers of that, of succumbing to this temptation of something that seems powerful and seductive in ways. And so those are the things that you want to really think about if you want to run a really effective horror game. I guess that's everything. I hope everyone has a happy Halloween. It's not a very big holiday down here, though lately some people have been, you know, adopting it. And anyways, let us know about what kind of Halloween gaming you've done, if any, probably over the weekend, I'm guessing, but maybe you're doing it on Halloween night itself. That would be a kick. So if you want to support me, please share this video. If you haven't already subscribed, by all means, please do subscribe. And share this video anywhere you think people find it interesting or anywhere they might be pissed off about it. And if you want to help me out to keep fighting the good fight and keep producing good products, there's lots of ways you can do that nowadays. I've got there's a Patreon link there. The Patreon doesn't give you anything, but it's if you like bought everything you've ever had to buy from me, and you still want to give me some support to help me keep fighting the good fight, I guess you could put money in there, or you could send, I guess now, a super thanks, because I'm now able to get those. But what I would really recommend is that you check out my products. I have products everywhere from like PDFs in the RPG Pundit Presents series that are as low as, like $1.99 or whatever, to, all my books. And probably the most expensive one is the Invisibles College. But if you want a really great game that is like an occult / horror / conspiracy / secret agent RPG, you'll probably be very happy with it, all the way down to one of my thinnest book in print, The Social Encounters on the Silk Road, which give you a whole mechanic for how to handle social interactions in OSR games without having to use social skills. And it works pretty well. And it's not just for the Silk Road. It's just that it was published as a source book for Sword and Caravan, but it's just about the mechanics of how to use the reaction roll system and turn it into a little bit more sophisticated so that it can be used to adjudicate all kinds of social scenarios. You might want to check it out. And of course, the Old School Companion 2, which has, I believe it's 27? I think I remember that right. 27 adventures that are all medieval authentic. They're all either based on medieval stories or medieval history or inspired by elements of medieval stories or history. And they're you can play them in any fantasy setting, and they have a really different take on what an adventure is like than your typical dungeon or most other fantasy adventures. I'm sure you're going to find them very interesting. But check out all my other products too: Lion and Dragons, Star Adventure, Arrows of Indra, and Sword and Caravan, and all the rest. You can get the links of them all in my description below. Just expand the description; there'll be links there. And thank you very much. Currently smoking. This is a Nirup Cuddy plus Argento Roots.